This episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k is sponsored by Adeptrol. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the last week of competitive play and talk about what's winning on the competitive scene. And this is one of the most interesting weeks of this series, I think, where I'll ever talk about. We have armies like Windrider host Aeldari, like Salamander Space Marines, like old-school aggressive melee Space Wolves, Grey Knights, Obeisance Necrons, all of which are doing well in light of the recent nerfs to factions like Death Guard and Imperial Knights, as well as wild armies out of lesser played factions like the brand new Leagues of Votann, as well as Genestealer cults, all of which is being engendered by this wild meta that we're in after this kind of power vacuum that was left by the insane top of the metagame getting nerfed. So I'm excited to talk about it. Let's dive into a metagame breakdown. First off, Aeldari continue at the top spot of the meta, taking down the Mad Warhammer GT, Purgatu's Combined Arms, and 40 Kings Cup. That was an Iron Man event, so a one-day event on an abbreviated schedule. We also see Thousand Suns, not too surprisingly, also doing well at the Baiho Open as well as Mid-Con Fall. Now, I have it on good authority. The Baiho Open was one of, if not the largest events to take place in Mexico, which is pretty cool, so shout out to those guys. We also see Necrons taking down the Critical Fail GT, as well as going X0-1 with a draw on the record at the Smite Club Open. Now, they tied with Grey Knights in the final round of that event with a natural draw. No differential scoring going on here. They just scored the same amount of points in the final game. So we'll be talking about both those lists, both Necrons and Grey Knights using the new Grey Knights Codex. From there, Ultramarines are back on the menu, taking down the Italian GT with an undefeated result, as well as winning the Goonhammer Open UK. Astra Militarum also with 2 undefeated at the Italian GT, as well as the GR meme team, and a little bit of a new army, or at least one that we haven't seen in a really long time, over there in Italy. Salamanders, with their new and updated Vulcan Heston datasheet, has taken down the Spring Thunder Cluckers GT, an incredibly named event, but also cool to see Salamanders using their new mechanics, although it was not with their new detachment, it was with a classic Firestorm Assault Force. That said, still a lot of really cool Salamanders technology to explore now that the faction has been updated. We also saw Dark Angels take on the Eagle Rock Open, Black Templars win Bloodshed Bay, so a lot of different Space Marine chapters doing well. Both compliant and non-compliant Space Marine varieties are showcasing their effective. Chaos Demons won the Wasteland Wars GT4, World Eaters on the East Midlands Slam, the Bedburger Schweinenkloppen saw 2 undefeated results, both from Space Wolves and Leagues of Votann. The Votann god himself, Tim Schneider, taking that event down with a really interesting list I'm excited to jump into. Imperial Knights took down the Bendigo Open, Genestealer cults down in the Land Down Under, winning Battle in the Bush 11, and last but certainly not least, as I mentioned earlier in the section, Grey Knights going X0-1, technically undefeated, tying in the final game at the Smite Club Open. Let's dive into all of these lists just after a word from our sponsors. This video is sponsored by Adeptrol. Adeptrol's been a huge supporter of the channel for a while, so I'm excited to talk about them and their new updates. For those who don't know, this is a dice probability calculator app that can give you quick and easy access to expected dice results at your fingertips. So if you're wondering about particular unit builds, or you want to know what the best course of action in a particular game state might be, you can use Adeptrol to very quickly get those results by importing unit profiles and quickly spitting out expected damage. This can help you smooth your army list building or give you insights into the game. And their latest update takes into account a ton of player feedback, improving things like unit profile imports, making it easier to import your datasheets and their weapon stats into the dice calculator, a full modifier and ability section to more easily input all types of attacker and defender special rules, a wider selection of results to grant you a deeper understanding of the results, as well as a new text summary to more easily understand the math you're looking at in English. So follow the links down in the video description to get access to Adeptrol today. And big thanks to them for sponsoring the video. So with that, we are going to start talking about Aeldari, our current faction frontrunners. Now, Ruben Zhao took down the Mad Warhammer GT using a very non-standard Aeldari army. We've talked about war hosts, we've talked about aspect hosts in the past. What we haven't talked about recently is Windrider hosts. Now, fortunately, on this channel, I did stream a game of Ruben playing this army. If you go check out my playlist for the Season 9 T5S2 Invitational, Ruben is actually a competitor in that. Unfortunately, he did go down in the group stage, but he did play a couple of rounds using a similar variety of Windrider host to this list. Now, for those who don't know, Windrider host is an army that makes your Windrider units battle line. So you can take the basic Aeldari jet bikes and take them in massive numbers, up to 6. It also has a huge number of bonuses for units like these. It allows them to go into strategic reserve at the end of your opponent's turn. It also allows you to bring them back in closer than normal. You can 6-inch deep strike them anywhere on the table for a command point. You can also do things like move after destroying enemy units, making this army one of the most technical to play. It has lots of ways to move around, redeploy itself, reposition into areas where it can deliver enormous amounts of shuriken cannon and scatter laser fire onto particular targets, and then potentially move back either forward to take objectives or into safety. So in this army, we're playing Eldrad Ulthuan. This guy's going to be giving Doom to a unit. He also generates you command points, so you can fuel all of that mobility from these Windrider bricks. We have Lycus to grant improved critical hits to a unit, and then those Shuriken Cannons are firing lethal hits into high toughness enemies. So on 5s and 6s, they automatically wound with those 2 damage cannon shots. So that's a lot of damage. If you are trying to deal with something like a Knight or a Super Heavy, something similar like that, you can just apply Lycus's bonus. You can start to deal some serious damage just with your lethal hits. We have a Corsair Void Reaver squad, 4 units of 6 Windriders. 3 of those are taking Shuriken Cannons. 1 of them is taking Scatter Lasers for the higher volume to clear out light infantry. We then have 2 units of 3 Windriders just as utility. Following that up are a pair of Fire Prisms to add some pretty hefty backline shooting. We have a Ranger squad as well as 1 Shining Spear unit, so a little bit of melee counterpunch. If you do push on this army and pressure it in melee, it does have a unit that can clap back and actually try to deal with you. We have a single Warwalker to provide its AP buff to those Shuriken Catapults, so we can put those up to AP2, AP3, with focused firepower, and if we attach one of the Warlock Skyrunners in the army into that unit, they also gain Ignore Cover. From there, we also have 2 units of Warp Spiders, 1 for utility, 1 to attach with Lycus, so it's a little bit more of a melee-oriented unit, but also allows you to apply that buff when she uses the unit's ability to Flicker Jump. So this army has a ton of mobility, it has a ton of scoring potential, because you have a lot of incredibly fast, hard-to-pin-down 2 OC units. It's backing all of that up with the Fire Prism shooting, and the Fire Prisms are difficult to get a beat on because their range is so long. They can linked fire, so only one of them has to have line of sight to get some effectiveness out of the second prism as well. And when you're dealing with this massive bikes, we're talking about 30 Windriders plus all of the other units in the center, the Shroud Runner unit as well to grant Ignore Cover, plus a Shining Spear unit, plus the Warlock Skyrunners, plus all the utility, that's all shooting at you. You have to deal with that. Doing that and also getting to grips with the Fire Prisms at the same time is oftentimes impossible. So they're going to get several turns of shooting at you if you're out in the open. And then in the late game, that's also going to be backed up by just an army that's incredibly good at scoring. So really cool to see some success, especially for Ruben, but also from a Windrider host, a non-standard variety of Aeldari. Now with that, we're going to move over to the Bacchio Open to talk about a player I actually discussed very recently on this channel in my recent Nova recap video. Malachi Fowler actually won this event going 6-0 with Thousand Suns in a Grand Coven. Now, I've talked about Malachi's list because I played against him at Nova, and we had a great game. Fortunately, Magnus did go down to Psychic shooting early on in the game, and that is not a good way to win with Grand Coven. But if you want more information about that, you can watch my video that I released last week about my games at the Nova Open, where I took 21st place out of 400 players. In this case, Malachi obviously won this whole tournament, winning 6 games in a row with a Grand Coven list that's focused on your sorcerers dealing incredible damage with psychic weapons. It can give them +1 to wound, extended range, devastating wounds once per game, or you can pay a command point to then flip those units into that doctrine. We have Magnus the Red, an Infernal Master with Eldritch Vortex for +1 damage, and as well as 2 sorcerers. A standard sorcerer with Umbrellific Crystal, so he's going to jump into a unit of 10 Rubric Marines with Warp Flamers. This is a really interesting unit because what it essentially does is force your opponent to engage with it. A Umbrellific Crystal Rubric Marine unit is almost impossible to fully screen out. It's always going to get a shot on something, and in many cases, it's going to get to shoot whatever it wants because it's able to up, down in its controller's turn. You don't have to decide before your turn whether or not you're going to do it, so you always know what your secondary draws are when you decide to do so. You can pick it, the entire unit of 10 up, drop them 9 inches away from enemies, and then make a normal move with them thanks to Temporal Surge to get their Flamers in range, or to get line of sight with their Psychers. So you can use this unit to Alpha Strike something out of your opponent's army, and then force your opponent to deal with it. It is only Rubric Marines, but there are 10 of them, and you do have to kill them all to get to the Sorcerer. If you don't kill the Sorcerer and he gets another activation, it's pure value for the Thousand Suns player. So you have to overcommit to kill them, and in doing so, oftentimes bring yourself into line of sight of either the Eldritch Vortex Sorcerer or Magnus the Red. And when that happens, that unit just counterattacks you, blows you out, and suddenly you're so far down in attrition, it's hard for you to get back in. If you don't answer the unit, they're just going to wreak havoc in your backline and continuously Temporal Surge around the table and continuously shoot you. Now, we also have a Terminator Sorcerer who can give +1 to hit after shooting at something with his psychic power. We have 2 units of Rubric Marines, a unit of 10 with Warflamers, as I mentioned, as well as a unit of 5 to attach with the Eldritch Vortex Infernal Master. We have a single Forge Fiend to deal with heavy infantry. 3 wound models are a little bit of a downside, or a little bit of a danger for 1,000 Suns. They have a lot of 2 damage shooting. Magnus the Red does have a 3 damage gun, but if you're dealing with a bunch of Terminators, a Forge Fiend is going to go a long way. We then also have 2 Mutolith Vortex Beasts to hold down the middle of the table. A unit of 5 Scarab Occult Terminators just as another bit of a beat stick unit that the Terminator Sorcerer can hop into, and they can be a good bulwark for him, so he can get multiple activations out of applying his buff as well. Following that up, a bunch of utility and some backline shooting. 3 units of Zangor Enlightened with Fatecaster Greatbows. These guys are great. They have a reactive move. They have a long-range gun. They have 2 damage. It's all amazing. Plus, a unit of Zangor Enlightened with Spears for utility, and a standard Zangor unit for a scouting squad. All that is pretty normal stuff. The interesting thing, obviously, is this big Ombralific Crystal Brick that Malachi uses to force the issue with his opponent early, rather than playing a more passive game that many other Thousand Suns armies will do. Now, with that, let's move over to the Critical Fail GT, where Idavol Heimdall took down the event with an Obeisance Phalanx coming out of Necrons. It's been a long time since we've talked about the Obeisance Phalanx, so it's cool that we're getting so many non-standard detachments out of the metagame right now. Now, for those who don't remember, including myself, this detachment gives your Noble and Triarch units basically an Oath of Moment. You can choose an enemy unit in your command phase that you then gain +1 to wound against with all of those units for the rest of the round. That you also have some very powerful stratagems inside this detachment. This includes things like Nano Assembly Protocols to give your vehicles -1 damage, and Territorial Obsession to give your Lichguard or Triarch units additional OC characteristic. You can also use Enslaved Artifice to gain 5+ critical hits, which allows you to score things like lethal hits more easily, as we just discussed in the Aeldari list. So we have some good army support effects, especially with Necron vehicles being relatively squishy but very effective. Having -1 damage on them for 1 command point is huge, backed up by very powerful melee and mid-range shooting when you need it. So what are we taking? We're taking a Catacomb Command Barge with a Resurrection Orb, so we can regenerate some nearby units. He also gives his Broadcaster's Orb +1 OC, which is huge. Imhotep the Stormlord to fuel that -1 damage, thanks to his free command points, plus 2 Overlords. One of them with Noble Warrior, that grants -1 to be hit in melee, so he can jump into a Lichguard unit, make them -1 to be hit and wounded in melee, assuming that the strength characteristic of the attacker is high enough. The other one with Honorable Combatant, which removes command points from enemies after you kill their characters in melee. It's not a huge deal, but it is a nice points filler enhancement. From there, we have 2 Annihilation Barges. These guys are very nice with -1 damage because they are protected by that 4+ invulnerable save Quantum Fielding save. So for 100 points, we get a little unit that can wander around, be annoying for your opponent to deal with. They can't undercommit into it because they won't kill it. It'll hold an objective and then reanimate back to full. Speaking of which, we have a Canoptic Reanimator. We have a Canoptic Spider to make those units even harder to kill. A Convergence of Dominion, which grants infantry units within 6 inches a 6+ Feel No Pain. This is particularly annoying on Lichguard units who have multiple wounds plus attack roll modifier effects plus a 4+ invulnerable save when they take their dispersion shields. So this, for 60 points, you can chain those units back. This thing will protect them even farther, make it harder for you to kill them. If you're chaining them back also to the Reanimator and the Catacomb Command Barge, they're gaining that OC bonus. You can pay to gain an additional OC bonus, so you can make them OC 3 each model, and you can reanimate them reactively with the Resurrection Orb as well. So those units are very difficult to kill and incredibly good at holding down objectives. In addition, you can also use the Command Barge to give this thing an OC value. If it's within 6 inches, because its base OC is 0, it actually goes to OC 1. So it can do things like hold objectives and even perform actions. The chapter-approved 2025 rules don't have any cutout for fortifications not performing actions. It's just that fortifications are typically OC 0. However, if you have an OC bonus on you, and you have a numerical OC value, it all works. So you can actually do actions with these guys, which actually gives you a unit on the table that's relevant for 60 points, in addition to buffing. We have 3 Doomsday Arcs, so we can trade shots and benefit from not only the Knoptic Spider, but also the -1 damage effect, the Nano Assembly Protocol. We have 1 Locust Heavy Destroyer for utility, and to bring a 6 damage anti-vehicle gun, plus 30 Lich Guard, all of them with Dispersion Fields and Hyperphase Swords. What a wild army. We have very, very resilient vehicles, thanks to the -1 damage, plus the 6 up feel no pain we can gain. That is all backed up by ridiculously resilient infantry. -1 to be hit, -1 to be wounded, 6+ feel no pain, 4+ invulnerable save, plus reactive reanimations available to them from Resurrection Orbs. These guys are tanky as hell, and even 1 model on an objective will oftentimes take it because of the stacking objective control bonuses we can give them. Absolutely insane army, and again, the metagame for this week is crazy because we're seeing all of these super wild detachments do well. Now, speaking of wild detachments, let's go ahead and talk about Edoardo Rinaldi from the Italian Grand Tournament, who went 5-0 with Astra Militarum. Now, not just any Astra Militarum, a Mechanized Assault, a detachment that I don't think I have seen talked about since the Codex first came out. And even so, it was a detachment that was largely overshadowed by other versions that the faction could bring. You could bring Hammer of the Emperor to make your vehicles faster, or you could bring Bridgehead Strike to make your infantry more flexible. Very few people took Mechanized Assault, even as the Codex was released. However, Eduardo over here is making do with it, because he ended up not winning the GT. His tiebreakers took him to second, but going undefeated, which is impressive nonetheless at an event as large as the Italian GT. Now, this detachment, for those who don't know, gives you +1 to wound with your ranged attacks when you disembark a transport. Full stop. In this detachment, we can do things like move units D6 inches after they disembark transports, essentially giving them an additional D6 movement if you disembark the transport before the transport moves itself. You can give your units full hit and wound rerolls targeting enemies on objectives when they disembark transports. You can reactively move transports after enemies move within 9 inches of your vehicles. And you can re-embark into your transports during your opponent's turn when they charge you or at the end of their fight phase. So a lot of flexibility when using your transports. Now, what are we taking in this detachment? First off, we are bringing Gaunt's Ghost as well as 2 Ruggledorn commanders. Now, the commanders obviously are important to give you some powerful shooting and powerful midboard presence because they're very difficult to kill and they have a trillion gunshots on them. But the Gaunt's Ghosts are particularly important because they give you end-of-phase orders. Ibram Gaunt is able to issue 2 orders to either himself or regiment units, and because his unit always up-downs into Deep Strike, you can disembark your units from a transport, then Deep Strike goes next to them, then he can order those units. So even if you wouldn't normally have officer orders available, Gaunt has you covered. Now, we're also taking a Kadashan Jungle Fighter unit, plus 2 Toroxes and 2 Chimeras as your transports. Now, we have several units of scouts, so we can give those pre-game movements. That includes the Kadashan Jungle Fighter squad, but we also are bringing 3 units of Khazarkin as well to provide some of that really aggressive, powerful infantry. So that gives you the opportunity to potentially push really far forward and get a lot of work done. You can scout the transport forward, then either disembark the Kadashans, move them with the rapid dispersal, then move themselves up normally, or again, we could potentially scout the vehicles, give them the vehicles themselves move, and then advance and disembark thanks to the Torox ability. Once you attack an enemy on an objective with them as well, those guys are obviously can also buff themselves with Warrior Elite to get additional order effects, and then we could use things like Clear and Secure to get full hit and wound rerolls on them. And a Khazarkin unit, especially with buffs like first rank fire, second rank fires for its plasma guns, shoots a ton of very high value attacks. So any buffs on those things is going to go a long way. From there, we also have a unit of 10 Ratlings. These guys are really interesting because the reactive re-embarkations are really powerful for them. They can move after shooting, so these guys are able to hop out, move forward, shoot their guns, then move back and hop back in the transport. So they can continuously generate value after coming out of a Chimera or something over the course of the game. That while their shooting isn't the craziest thing in the world, having a big unit like that that's able to continuously deal that damage is a huge deal. Now, we also have 3 units of Angron. These guys are also good at just sort of filling in the transports. They are independently very good at clearing objectives and knocking down enemy utility units, which allows us to clear out things that are trying to jam the transports or complete secondaries without having to deliver either the Rogal Dorns themselves or the powerful Khazarkin squads. And they're able to be delivered by these vehicles rolls as well. Plus, we have another Rogaldorn battle tank to fill things out, and a Hellhound to strip cover from enemies. So this is very much using what is essentially a backbone of a very solid Astra Militarum build, using things like Kasrkin, using this, shoot and scoot, Rattling Squad plus Ogryn squads as utility is already pretty solid, backed up by Rogaldorn tank commanders, but then you start to add the component where you have these really obnoxious transports that your opponent has to play around the entire game, and as they're trying to push onto a Rogaldorn tank commander, you have all of these reactive effects that you can use. Re-embarkations, reactive moves, additional movement on your disembarking infantry, so you can protect the Rogaldorns as they take the center of the table. What a cool army. Cool to see non-standard builds like this doing well, and oh boy, we have a lot of them. Now, speaking of non-standard builds, we couldn't keep things too unique for too long, so let's move over to the actual winning list of the Italian GT. Ludovico Mazza, who won it using, guess what it is? It's an Ultramarine Gladius Task Force. It's back. It's been a hot minute since we've seen one of these on the table, and it didn't go too far. They're still hanging around. So first of all, we have a Captain in Gravis Armor with Artificer Armor to make him harder to kill. So he's a 2+ base armor save. He has a 5+ feel no pain thanks to Artificer Armor and halves all incoming damage. He also gets a free stratagem. So he can squad tactics in and out of cover, or he can Armor of Contempt for 0 command points. This guy is a nightmare to engage with. You basically have to treat him as if he is a battle tank when it comes to trying to kill him. You assume that he has the same defensive profile as something like a Vindicator, and you might be coming close to how survivable this little guy is. He's so difficult to take down, even when he's just standing in the open, not really doing anything, kind of unassuming. So he's one of the game's best utility characters just because he can wander out in the open and then basically have nothing happen to him. From there, we have a jump pack captain with Fire Discipline. That sounds absolutely insane. It gives you rerolls on advance rolls, which is pretty good if you're assuming that you're going to be using things like Assault or Devastator Doctrine on your units, and it gives you sustained hits with your guns. Now, why are we putting it on a jump pack captain? That's a weird place to put it. He's a melee guy. The answer is that there is a unit of 10 Vanguard veterans with Infernal Pistols in the army. So we can declare Devastator Doctrine, advance these guys 12 inches plus a d6 movement. You can reroll the d6 to get them closer. They want to ideally get within 3 inches of their target for their Melta to turn on their Infernal Pistols. Then you Oath of Moment their target. You blast away with 10 D3 plus 2 damage shots with sustained hits, full rerolls, and +1 to wound, which means they wound basically any target in 40k that doesn't have a wound modifier on it on 4s, rerolling all of their hit rolls and sustaining, so you're probably handing your opponent, I would say, probably 4 or 5 saves at D3 plus 2 damage each, potentially AP 5 ignore cover if you use Storm of Fire on the same unit. That's crazy. Then, if they're able to, you also back it up with 40 Strength 6 AP 1 lethal hit melee attacks as well. So this unit, if it's able to wrap an ingress into an annoying spot and then walk up to a target, it can shoot a unit to death from full, just straight up kill a tank, then charge and kill another tank. They go insane. What a cool unit to see. This is not a combination that's played very often. It is relatively expensive. It's kind of inconsistent because of the short range. However, when it works, it goes insane. It goes crazy. We then have a Combi Weapon Lieutenant as another utility unit, Marneus Calgar, as well as Robu de Gilliman. Now, Marneus Calgar has a unit of company heroes to hang out with him. Those guys are going to give him -1 to be wounded. He has a bunch of wound manipulation effects because you can assign damage once the company heroes are dead to himself, and if he has a Victrix Honor Guard alive, he gets a 4+ feel no pain. I have a whole video about how that interaction works and why Marneus Calgar is one of the most annoying units in Warhammer 40,000 to kill. Even if he's not the Warlord, because Gilliman must be the Warlord, he doesn't generate his CP. He's still worth it for being a ridiculously powerful melee threat that is also going to tank basically your whole army is shooting to actually kill it. And then obviously we have Robu de Gilliman to give double Oath of Moment targets so that we can turn on combos like the Fire Discipline Jump Pack Captain. We then have some backline shooting, 3 Ballistus Dreadnoughts, as well as an Infiltrator Squad to hold down the home objective, a Scout Squad for utility, and an Assault Jump Back Intercessor Squad, again for utility and to clear off enemy objectives. Last and certainly not least is a unit out of my own little disgusting twisted heart. It's a unit of 5 Assault Bolter Inceptors. These guys are not seen very often because of the low AP characteristic and relatively low strength of Assault Bolters. However, once you get a weapon that is twin-linked and you shoot it at the Oath of Moment target, it kind of goes crazy because regardless of what your strength characteristic is, if you are +1 to wound and twin-linked, you should convert about 50% of your wounds. When you're talking about Oath of Moment, so you're rerolling your hit rolls as well, the Inceptors are also converting probably 120-ish% of their attacks. So they come in with 18 attacks, and they should be getting somewhere around 22 or so hits. Of those, you're almost guaranteed to get 11 wounds onto your target. That's already pretty good. Those are 2 damage wounds, and you can Storm of Fire them. We talked about that with the Vanguard Veterans, but you can also do it on the Inceptors, and it's better there because it gives them AP 2, AP 1 up to 2, plus Ignore Cover. So most enemies are saving on 5s, and you're handing them 11 2-damage saves, which means you're probably good for about 14 damage on most vehicle targets. If that ends up being a toughness 9 vehicle, it goes even crazier because you start wounding on 4s rerolling, which means you're giving them 75% of your hits, so like close to 16 saves. So the amount of damage that this Inceptor squad can do, people wildly underestimate it. It's insane. Sometimes you also see them with incursors to give +1 a hit so they can full reroll all of their hits and wounds and or all of their hits anyway, to try to get more sustained hit 2s. You can still fish for that with Oath of Moment, but the math is kind of shaky. It's just about the same as holding your dice versus rerolling them into trying to get more hits. But either way, the Inceptor squad goes crazy once they have all those buffs active. I love these guys. I think they're great. I think they're wildly underplayed, especially because they also give you a good out for a lot of sort of horde enemies. Because they're so good at killing light infantry, they win on 2s or 3s rerolling, plus they get those sustained hits, so they're generating 21 or 22 of those wound rolls. They can clear out 10 or 20-man units relatively efficiently if you have both the moment active, which makes them good in a wide variety of matchups. I love this squad, and it's been so long since we've seen it on the table. What an absolutely insane list from Ludovico Mazza over here in Ultramarines. It has been a while since we've seen Ultramarines Gladius Task Force, but it's been even longer since we saw a creative Ultramarines Gladius Task Force, so that's always cool to see. Now, let's keep talking about Space Marines for a while, and speaking of creative Space Marines, let's go ahead and talk about the Spring Thunder Cluckers event, which was won by Colin K, running none other than Salamanders. Now, Salamanders did get a new detachment, which is legal this weekend. It was put in the Militarum Field Manual last week, so I think a lot of events were able to use it. However, it is largely a side grade from the classic Firestorm Assault Force. It gives you additional bonuses for your Infernus Marines, as well as a stratagem to fall back your infantry and still shoot with them, but you lose things like a end-of-phase re-embarkation, which you can do to protect units like Vulcan and Heston. So there is definitely lots of reason to stay with the OG Firestorm Assault Force builds from Salamanders. And I like that about the detachment. It's not just strictly better than regular Firestorm, it's a side grade, which is cool. So what are we taking here? First off, we're taking Adrax Egatone, one of the strongest melee characters in the game, wildly underplayed, but he is only available in Salamander, so he's difficult to get a hand on. Plus, he doesn't attach to too many units, but he gives whatever his unit is attached into full wound rerolls, full stop, period. So he's attacking 5 times with a 3-damage Thunderhammer, full wound rerolls, plus he's attaching into 6 Blade Guard Veterans, so 24 additional 2-damage attacks, again, full wound rerolls. Plus they reroll their ones to hit, which also affects himself. So he is hitting on 2s, wounding most things in the game on probably 3s or 4s, because you're going to use Crucible of Battle for +1 to wound here, with full rerolls. So the chance he converts 100% of those 3-damage attacks into a target is very high. In addition, you're also then throwing 24 almost full reroll attacks that are likely wounding on 4s or 5s, rerolling all their wound rolls. So you're handing your opponent another, I don't know, between 10 and 15 saves for 2 damage each. The output from this unit is crazy. It's just shy of one-shotting a Knight chassis, like a Questoris Knight, once all those buffs are applied. And that gets even better if you have Oath of Moment applied. Now, the other melee character we have here is a Judiciar with Champion of Humanity. Champion of Humanity makes his stats unable to be modified. So this includes things like Armor of Contempt and damage characteristic modifiers. It's only 10 points. The restriction is that it must be attached to a Tacticus unit, so you can't put it on the heavier characters, but that's where most of the solid melee characters in Space Marines are, which means that this guy's swinging a 2-damage melee attack with devastating wounds that can't be modified by damage reduction effects. He's attaching it to another Blade Guard Veteran squad to act as another melee bulwark. Then we are also bringing a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, just for utility, plus Vulcan Heston. Now, Vulcan just got a new datasheet, which is very exciting for him. He's got basically some keyword changes, and his ability works while he's in transport now. The big thing is that he can now embark into Primaris transports, which he couldn't previously. He could not embark into Impulsors, but he can now. However, he's lost his ability to jump into Firstborn transports because he's now Tacticus keyworded, unless you put him into a Firstborn squad, which I'm not sure you're going to do. So He gives you full wound rerolls on all your Melta weapons and Flamer weapons. So any Torrent and Melta in the army, full wound rerolls, full stop. And we do have a couple of Infernus squads, Eradicator squads, as well as a Land Raider Redeemer that he can apply that buff to. Now, on top of that, he also chooses an objective at the start of the game, and he becomes OC10 and gains a 4+ feel no pain while on that objective. And that means that this army oftentimes wants to go first because it wants to play very aggressively. It wants to push these Meltas with assault, army-wide assault, and potentially +1 strength into your opponent's face, blast them away, and then hide its characters and try to set it up to do it again next turn or counterattack you with the melee units. If it goes second, however, you have an OC10 individual model who will just sit in the back of your army, hop in and out of transports, hide behind terrain, and just threaten control of a center objective by himself at the end of the game. So bottom round 5, you're almost guaranteed to hold at least 2 objectives if you hold your home +1 in the center that he's chosen. So as long as you don't lose Vulcan, he's kind of tough to kill, he's going to give you a boatload of points at the end. So incredibly powerful and flexible character. Now, we also are taking 3 units of 3 Eradicators, so we have a lot of little anti-tank units who can rock out and blow up individual vehicles. We have an Infernus squad who, with Vulcan, becomes OC2, so they're going to be able to act as a disruption piece on an objective. We then have 2 Invader ATVs. Again, these guys are rocking multi-meltas. They have synergy with the detachment. They have synergy with Vulcan, and they're very good utility, so they're just good all around. I think 2 to 3 Melta Invader ATVs should be taken in every Firestorm Assault Force, and I'll die on that hill. We also then have a Repulsor to carry some of these big bricks to the battlefield, and a Repulsor Executioner, which can hold one of the Eradicator squads or one of the Blade Guard Veteran bricks, or even the Infernus Marines if it wants to, plus a Land Raider Redeemer to bully the midboard. So 3 T12 vehicles that can push up and again, play very aggressively and try to lay the beat down on your opponent or deliver these really powerful infantry squads that then also can, sort of hit pretty hard themselves, especially with how mobile they are with a army-wide assault from the detachment ability plus a scout squad. Now, I don't know exactly where all of these units are going to be embarking into. That probably depends on the matchup and the situation. The big benefit, though, is that you can use rapid embarkation at the end of the fight phase, and this is unique to Firestorm Assault Force. The Salamanders version doesn't have this stratagem, which is a big deal, which allows you to embark a transport end of the fight phase as long as you started the turn unembarked. What this lets you do is, for example, if you start Vulcan not embarked in a transport, you can run him into the middle of the battlefield, apply his buff to an enemy, and then re-embark him into the transport. Or, for example, if your opponent kills your Impulsor, your unit disembarks, they can then take their whole turn on your own turn, move, shoot, charge, fight, and at the end of that turn, because they started unembarked, re-embark into a transport. So as soon as you kill what you charged, you can take a Blade Guard Veteran squad, move it up to the center, ensure that it doesn't get totaled by a unit killing the transport and then the unit inside. If you keep them safe by giving them a place to hide or by ensuring that your opponent doesn't get too many shots on them, you can then get a full turn out of that unit, then jump them back in the transport. And if you can stage your infantry into aggressive positions to do that without having to lose your transports, it's even better. So this stratagem's incredibly powerful, and that's one of the reasons we have so many really, really good transports to be taking. The other thing that we can do is use Burning Vengeance. If we have the Eradicator squads in any of these units, for 1 command point after a transport gets shot, you can just disembark and shoot back at the target. Something like an Eradicator squad inside the Repulsor can hop out, fire their guns, and then, potentially if they want to, reactively re-embark into that transport if your opponent targets it with a charge, because the embarkation restrictions are only applied to the same phase. So you can disembark in the shooting phase, then re-embark that transport thanks to the Repulsor ability in the charge phase. So the amount of weird transport things that Firestorm Assault Force can do is crazy, and this army uses it incredibly effectively. What a cool list. Now, following that up, let's talk about some non-compliant armies. We're going to start with Dark Angels, who have a bunch of really powerful detachments. This time we're talking about a company of hunters, which occasionally, over the last couple of weeks, sees some strong play. Now, this is obviously the mounted version of the mounted Ravenwing focused detachment for the sub-faction. It gives all your army advance, shoot, and then mounted units advance, fall back, shoot, and charge. So they can just operate normally all the time. Even as a baseline, this gives you half of the Firestorm Assault Force rule. And then if you have any mounted units, which this list certainly does, you get essentially both Firestorm Assault Force and Stormline's Task Force detachment abilities jammed together, which is incredibly powerful. It's super crazy. So James Walsh over here from the Eagle Rock Open took down his event with this, including 3 Ravenwing command squads, one of them with Mastercrafted Weapon for free precision on the Ravenwing champion, one with Recon Hunter for a 9-inch scout move. That's important to be able to deploy in the open and then take cover in mid-board terrain. So let's say you have a ruin just outside your deployment zone. Your unit, because these units are very large, can move up into that ruin on turn 1. So they don't have to worry about their line of sight when they deploy before they roll to go first. Last one with Master of Maneuver, so they can strategic reserve a turn early. They treat the battle round as one earlier when it comes to reserving in. So we can have one command squad kind of hiding in the back of your deployment zone, one scouting into a forward position, and one off the table that can rapid ingress early. We then have 3 Outrider squads to attach into those guys. The big thing there is that they're going to give the attached characters their +1 strength and AP and a damage bonus, So those Ravenwing champions are coming in with 3 damage, strength 6 melee attacks, which is incredibly powerful for only essentially what is a 200-point unit. That is very fast, has a bunch of 1 damage melee attacks, plus this one character who's going to hit incredibly hard. And again, one of those guys is going to have precision. So when he comes in, he can just chop your character right in half if he gets line of sight. And given how fast these units are, line of sight is relatively easy to get because they can get around ruin walls and around terrain features very easily. We then have 3 Ballistic Dreadnoughts in addition to 2 Centurion Devastator squads, all relatively slow shooting batteries that gain, first of all, natural hit rerolls. So we don't have to use any Oath of Moment to give them their rerolls to hit. They just operate by themselves, which means we can give Oath of Moment to whatever the Outrider squads are attacking. So they can move up, they can fire Plasma Talons, they can charge into melee, and they can get their own hit rerolls. All of the gun batteries are going to be working by themselves. Now that's 3 Grav Cannon Centurion Devastator squads for the anti-vehicle. We then have a Scout squad for utility. We're supporting that shooting with 2 Stormspeeder Hammer Strikes. So that gives us like a bunch of Melta attacks, plus we can strip cover from enemies in order to make especially the Ballistic Dreadnoughts, and honestly, the Centurion Devastators are low AP 2. I believe they're AP 2 on their Centurion missile launchers, and I think only AP 1 on the Grav Cannons, which is the big downside, but you can strip cover from 2 enemy units with 2 Stormspeeder Hammer Strikes. Don't forget, those can all advance and shoot just fine. And the Stormspeeders also gain the Ravenwing keyword, so they get access to a bunch of stratagems as well. You can give them things like -1 to be hit on the crackback. Plus, we have 2 Invader ATVs, again, super useful, and they can advance and shoot in this detachment and still charge. Having Company of Hunters back in the cycle here, especially one that's focused so heavily on shooting. Oftentimes, we see these Company of Hunters builds that play kind of like a Stormlands task force, where they take like 30 bikers and they just try to push you out of primary. However, they die really quickly. If you have multi-damage shooting, they will just immediately vaporize to any sort of mass 3 or 4 damage attack or even mass 2 damage attack. That's like good against heavy infantry. It's also going to be good against them. However, armies like this play more like a standard Space Marine list that just has these hyper-fast, hyper-flexible units that they can use to sort of answer problems, which is cool. Now, moving over to Warzone Houston, we have even more Space Marines doing well. Justin Moore taking Blood Angels to that event to a 5-0 record, tying for the top place spot. And he was running a Liberator Assault group. Now, we've seen a lot of various Liberator Assault groups. This one is a little bit more shooting focused. It kind of feels to me like a lot of people are moving towards Repulsor Executioners just as like for the efficiency of their profile. They have really good resilience, a T12, 16 wound body, plus a good anti-vehicle gun, plus good anti-infantry shooting. Good all the way around. They don't necessarily have the same sort of level of efficiency as the Black Templars variety does, but just the raw profile is good enough that a lot of people are playing them. So Justin here is rocking an interesting combination of characters, a pair of foot captains. One of them has Ragefield Warrior, plus a jump pack captain and a jump pack chaplain, Commander Dante, and a combi weapon lieutenant. We've got double assault intercessor squads to attach the 2 foot captains. Obviously, we can use the Finest Hour plus Ragefield Warrior on one of them for incredible damage, especially on the Oath of Moment target. The other one can just, Blood Angels captains, especially with +2 strength from Liberator Assault Group's detachment ability, are great, so nothing bad to say there. We have a Jump Pack Assault Intercessor squad, 2 Infiltrator squads for utility. Interesting. Somebody got bad touched by Deathshot Terminators, maybe. It really wanted to screen out their backline, so that's what we're doing. We've got double Repulsor Executioners, again, for really solid shooting and survivability. A Scout squad for forward operation, plus a Sanguinary Guard squad to hang out with Commander Dante, so he can turn on all their defensive buffs, then give them his charge bonus. Then, the pièce de résistance here 20 Vanguard veterans, 2 units of 10 with jump packs, these guys rocking storm shields. So one of them is going to be attaching in with the jump pack captain. He gives them a passive +1 strength bonus, plus the +2 strength they already gained from the detachment ability, so they're up to +3 and a +1 attack. So the unit, not counting the captain, is rocking 50 attacks at strength 8. Which is pretty good with lethal hits, potentially lance if you red rage them. We also then have a jump pack chaplain. He has speed of the Primarch. The unit's relatively resilient because it's 10 bodies with a 4+ invulnerable save, so it's tough to shoot down. He gives them fight first, so you can swing first when they get charged on the counter attack, and he also deals mortal wounds at the start of that fight, plus he gives them +1 to wound permanently. So those guys are only attacking against rank 7, but they basically have built-in lance. So both of these units can commit at the same time. One of them is going to get the stratagem for free from the captain. The other one just has a built-in +1 to wound bonus. So both of them essentially get that effect. Now, the big downside of this unit, and the reason that it hasn't seen too much play, is that they are only AP1, so oftentimes they get Armor of Contempted, or your opponent has a tough armor save. But if you're not expecting to hit that profile, these guys throw out so many high-strength melee attacks that they will clip through most targets. If you're looking at like a 3+ save that doesn't necessarily have a strong, any AP reduction effects, for example, or a super strong invulnerable save, these guys will clip through it pretty well. But that AP1 is the big downside of the unit, especially when compared to things like Sanguinary Guard, who are smaller units, but with greater attacks, more AP, multi-damage, so better at hitting heavier targets. But the other thing, if you're looking at clearing light infantry, the high strength, high volume attacks from Vanguard veterans is much better as well. And they're representing 20 wounds with a 4+ invulnerable save on the swing back too. So lots of benefits for Vanguard veterans. It's been a while since we've seen Vanguard veterans in this sort of level of, in these numbers in Blood Angels, but they definitely haven't gotten anywhere really. Now with that, we're going to move over to Black Templars. For the Bloodshed Bay GT, there was one going 6-0 by Adam West Manchesterfield with a Gladius Task Force Black Templars list. Now, I've talked at length about how these lists tend to work. Because Black Templars, their own detachments aren't super suited for the kinds of data sheets they can bring, Gladius Task Force gives them a ton of flexibility, and you can really utilize the power of their Repulsor Executioner shooting, backed up by how powerful their melee is. They're a very flexible sub-faction, so they need a flexible detachment to make the best use of, which means they take Gladius Task Force quite a bit. So in this list, we're taking 3 Castellan plus Marshal combos. So the Castellans can give you rerolls, either hits of 1 or full hit rerolls based on a leadership chest when they're selected to shoot. The Marshals give them enhanced critical hits of 5 up to give them additional lethal hits. We then have an Empress Champion as well that I think is just going to be hanging around by himself. He's a very good lone operative character, so you can just use him normally, and sometimes you take him with Artificer Armor. Otherwise, you can just use like squad tactics to try to protect him, and he can be kind of a late game punch, plus just an objective holder in the early game if you need to. Being a higher than average speed characteristic also helps him quite a bit as well. We then have an Intercessor Squad to hold the back line, 2 Impulsors to deliver some of our melee infantry, 2 units of Assault Jump Pack Intercessors for utility as well, a Gladiator Lancer. Now, the Black Templars one does get a multi-melta on top, so it's a little bit more punchy than the standard Gladiator Lancer profile, but it also just gives a cheaper sort of backline shooting that we can use to instigate a fight that then you can push your Repulsor Executioners forward to try to finish off. We have 2 Repulsor Executioners that, alongside the Impulsors, are going to be carrying around these melee infantry bricks, plus a Scout Squad for utility and 3 units of Sword Brethren to jump into those Castellan and Marshal combos. Pretty classic there. The other big benefit that Gladius Task Force has with these guys is that they have a reactive move after you fall back from them. You can also combo that with the Gladius Task Force reactive move. Whether or not you're moving up to them, they can use squad tactics to run away, or if you're moving away from them, they can use their own reactive move to run away. And any of those, if they get close enough, can go into a transport to re-embark them and keep them safe. Now with that, we're going to move on to what I absolutely swear, hand to my heart, is the last Space Marine list we're going to talk about this weekend. At Bedburger Schwenenkloppen, Mario Tietz went undefeated with a Space Wolves army. Now, this is kind of a classic Space Wolves build. It's actually been a while since we've seen this variety on the battlefield. It's a Stormlands Task Force. Between this and Gladius Task Force Ultramarines, we're getting so many blasts from the past today. Mario here was focusing very heavily on both melee infantry as well as Thunderwolf Cavalry. He's not taking Gladius Task Force, not really focusing on the backline shooting, just trying to pressure his opponent with unending hordes of melee infantry, as a Space Wolf player should. This includes Arjak Rockfist for the powerful Terminator character. Good against characters, monsters, and vehicles. He has bonuses against all those keywords. We have Logan Grimnar, Bjorn the Fell-Handed, Ragnar Blackmane, and a standard Wolf Priest. plus a combi weapon lieutenant for utility. Now we have a unit of 10 Blood Claws. Oftentimes we get Ragnar Blackbane into the Blood Claw unit because they already have Advance and Charge built in, so he grants them full hit and wound rerolls, which affects himself as well. The unit's kind of expensive, and the Blood Claws themselves are only of limited power, I guess. They're just a bunch of basically strength 4 AP1 chainsword attacks. However, with full rerolls, they start to get some work done. We have a standard Intercessor squad to hold the Mac line down, plus a grand total of 15 Thunderwolf Cavalry. 1 unit of 3 that you can use as a trading piece or utility, plus 2 units of 6 that we're actually going to try to beat down our opponent with. They can get -1 to hit and wound from Ride Hard, Ride Fast. There's also a Lance stratagem for them in the faction, which is in the detachment, which is huge because their strength is only 5. They don't really have huge buffs to strength, which can be a problem for them going into heavier vehicles. We then also have 3 units of Wolfen with Storm Shield, so some additional sort of trading units that are very good into high toughness enemies because they're anti-monster and anti-vehicle. Plus, they can shock enemies to give them -1 to hit on the crackback. We have a Wolfguard Terminator brick that it's likely attaching in with Arjank Rockfist to deliver him to the battlefield, but you can also attach Logan Grimnar if you wanted to. However, Logan Grimnar oftentimes just acts as an independent operator, and he kind of works like a Calidus assassin. You hold him into reserve until you need him, and then he can jump in from battle round 1 onwards because he can choose himself to arrive from strat reserve on turn 1 with his own ability. Then command point tax enemies within 12 inches of him, so you can kind of set him up wherever you need to deny interrupt or rerolls or defensive strats. In addition, he also kind of gives you the old sort of turn 1 deep strike-ish from the Thunderwolf Cavalry. You can't rapid ingress with it because he only works during his own movement phase, but he can bring Thunderwolf Cavalry or these Wolfguard units in on turn 1 if you feel like you need to. But oftentimes I think he goes by himself and he just acts as his own little independent operator. We then have the Wolf Priest, who's going to hop into a unit of double power weapon Wolfguard Head Takers. He gives them +1 to wound, which is awesome, so they don't need any additional bonuses because the detachment doesn't have any bonuses for units like these. And they have 36 melee attacks in total, which is huge. Delivery for them is a little bit tough because they are relatively squishy. They're just 3 wound basic Space Marine bodies. But in this case, if you're trying to fight through 2 units of Thunderwolf Cavalry plus 3 units of Wolfen, dealing with and a Wolfguard Terminator squad, there's 5 Wolfguard Terminators here, plus the 2 Terminator characters, also dealing with this unit of 18 wound brick of Wolfguard Head Takers that can regenerate models back to the unit because the Wolf Priest basically also counts as an apothecary. He's going to bring a guy back every turn. So if you can't kill them, all told, they're just going to regenerate, so it's not really worth attacking them. And if you do attack them, it's pulling focus from the Thunderwolf Cavalry, the Terminators, or the Wolfen that are beating your face in. So they act as a very good sort of late game piece. That's when they start to ensure that they get their devastating wounds on the target that they want to, because you've started to kill, hopefully, over the course of the game, killed their original quarry target early, so you can flip it to something they can charge. Then they charge in, they throw 36 devastating wound attacks into you with +1 to wound, so they wound on 5s or 4s, and it's just so many, it's such a volume of attacks that they'll kill most targets. So pretty cool to see this variety of Space Wolves on the table. We've seen some Gladius Task Force play with them recently, but nothing that's quite as Space Wolfy as this build. Now, with that, we've talked about enough Space Marines. Let's move over and talk about the other undefeated player at the Bedburger Schwanenklappen. We have Tim Schneider, Votann God, running Dêlve Assault Shift. This is from the brand new codex. We're finally seeing some results from the new release Leagues of Votann, and this is the Chthonian Berserk and Earthshaker focused detachment. Now, the detachment ability is incredibly simple. It gives Chthonian Berserks Deep Strike. That's it. It also makes them battle line. So they're able to rapid ingress into weird areas of the battlefield, use that 4+ feel no pain to absorb damage, and then run directly into you. Now, the list isn't purely focused on Chthonian Berserks, but it has enough of them to be scary. Those guys have a 4+ feel no pain. They have Weavework Buttress as a command point to give them -1 to be wounded from ranged attacks. And then there's a Brokir Ironmaster who is going to, when he's near one of the vehicles in the army, he's going to gain Lone Operative, so he's going to be able to hang out with them. That allows him to utilize Delvework Navigator. It's an enhancement that allows you to spend yield points, which is beneficial for this detachment because it wants to remain in its hostile acquisition mode, which is the early game mode of the Votann army ability, which gives you additional hit bonus when you are targeting an enemy on an objective. It also gives you rerolls on advanced and charge rolls, which is obviously great if we're running a bunch of melee infantry. So you want to have outlets to spend your yield points when you have them so that you can continuously try to keep yourself in that early doctrine, for lack of a better term. And Delvework Navigator allows you to spend 2 yield points to regenerate Chthonian Berserks back into your units. So you can do things like rapid ingress a Chthonian Berserk unit out of Deep Strike or out of Strat Reserve, then Weavework Buttress it to reduce incoming damage, lose a couple of models, then regenerate them in front of the unit to give them additional distance forward. Then you can use Augmented Assault to give them advance into charge up to +2 to their movement characteristics. So you can make these guys movement 8, advance and charge. We're also running a couple of Hecaton land fortresses. So in addition to giving some pretty solid shooting support, these guys are running SP heavy conversion beamers, so they want to be a little bit farther back in order to deal their maximum damage, but those guys are going to be able to carry around these big units of 10 Chthonian Berserks. So it's likely that one of them is utilizing this rapid ingress stratagem. The other 2 are embarking inside the land fortresses and being carried to the fight. Now, we also have a pair of Earthshakers. Those guys are both equipped with Tremor Shells, which is a high volume, 1 damage indirect fire weapon. They do have heavy, but they only hit on a baseline 5-up, which means that even with heavy, they're hitting on a 5. If they do benefit from hostile acquisition, they target an enemy touching an objective. So, for example, your opponent's backline, they will get down to hitting on 4s, but that's as low as they go in terms of their ballistic skill characteristic. However, they can use Tectonic Fracture to slow down enemies that they shoot at with their Earthshakers, so there is a little bit of board control you can do with that, but the big thing is that you can put a little bit of pressure onto light infantry, stuff like Aeldari and lighter units. Don't really want to see these guys across the table, especially if they have aggressive melee stuff of their own that's going to be threatening those land fortresses. Then we also have a bunch of forward operations, so we also are taking a pair of Capricus Carriers. Those can break 2 units of Hurricane Jaegers into 4 units of 5 and scout up the middle of the battlefield. On top of that, we're also bringing a pair of Memnir Strategists. So a little 45-point guy. We can hold 1 on the backline objective in order to generate yield points or to reduce yield points if we want to retain our hostile acquisition for as long as possible. We can also use one of them as more of a utility unit to range out and either perform actions or try to take objectives himself. And then last but certainly not least, we can utilize some of these combinations of stratagems like Weavework Buttress, like Tectonic Fracture, like Augmented Assault with Uthar the Destined, reduce command point spend. So we have a foreign operation from the Capricus Carriers that's going to force you to fight, engage with them in the center of the battlefield so that they don't continuously score. You're then able to counterattack with the Hecaton land fortresses. Anything punching into the Hecaton land fortresses gets either rapid ingress by 10 Chthonian Berserks coming out of the ground, or just disembarked and charged by 20 Chthonian Berserks on the battlefield. Tons and tons of sort of attack and counterattack options, all the while you're getting hammered by Chthonian Earthshakers from the backline. Really cool to see this detachment do well. I've been theorizing since the Codex came out that this detachment's actually kind of a sleeper hit. The potential damage from Chthonian Berserks in it is crazy. There's a stratagem as well, Cyberstim Infusion, to give them up to full wound rerolls, and they can take concussion mauls. They've been equipped with a combination. Actually, 1 unit in this list is taking heavy plasma axes for the more versatile profile, and then 2 units with concussion mauls and a pair of concussion gauntlets in those units as well. Those are anti-monster, anti-vehicle 3, and then gain full wound rerolls. The downside is that their hit roll is relatively inconsistent. If you don't spike low on the hit roll, they'll kill basically anything in the game once they're fully charged up. Really cool to see these guys on the battlefield, and I'm excited to see if it goes even farther in the future. We're going to head on over to the Wasteland Wars GT4 to talk about Derek Ramsey and his Chaos Demons. Now, this is another detachment. It's crazy, the number of blasts from the past we've seen here. Another detachment I haven't talked about in probably 6 months. Plague Legion. That's right, the Nurgle detachment for Chaos Demons, which focuses very heavily on inflicting damage using the Shadow of Chaos Army rule. So this is basically everything in the detachment is Nurgle keyworded, and they project a 9-inch aura of Shadow of Chaos for enemies only that also forces an additional enemy unit to take a Battleshock check regardless of their normal Battleshock status. So even if they're not below half strength in the command phase, so in the command step, kind of works like Shadow of Chaos from Tyranids, you force an additional Battleshock check, and because that unit is in Shadow of Chaos definitively, because they're within 9 inches of a Nurgle unit, if they fail, they're at -1 and they take D3 mortal wounds. Now, from there, we are taking Epidemius. He can generate you command points based on the number of models that your Chaos Demons have killed, which is huge because everything is a Nurgle Demon, so he's basically going to be generating that constantly. We have 2 Great Unclean Ones. One of them is taking the Droning Shroud. That is essentially Bellacor's aura for Nurgle Demons. He makes all of them untargetable from outside 18 inches if they're within 6 inches of him, so he can protect the army on turn 1, especially, which is enormous. The army also tends to have a focus on shooting. It just naturally buffs shooting fairly well. In addition to the Great Unclean Ones reducing your toughness characteristic, it also has the other Great Unclean One is taking Font of Spores, which grants +1 AP to all weapons, including your ranged weapons, to everything within 6 inches of that guy. We have Rodigus, as well as a Sloppity Bilepiper. Now, the Sloppity Bilepiper has an interesting effect where he forces Battleshock checks at the start of the fight phase. So you're forcing Battleshock checks thanks to normal attrition. You're also forcing 2 additional Battleshock checks each round, 1 in each player's command phase within 9 inches. Then the Sloppity Bilepiper pulses Battleshock checks and everything. He has Canker Blight, so each time an enemy within 6 inches fails a Battleshock check, you can kill a model from the unit instead of dealing D3 mortals. It excludes monsters and vehicles, so you can't kill big stuff. However, heavy infantry or mounted units that fail leadership checks around this guy just straight up die. You don't have to deal damage to them, and in some cases, you can have big or multi-wound mounted units, for example, like a Lord Discordant on Hellstalker. You force a Battleshock check on him, and if he fails, he goes away. It could be a 200-point character, and he just disappears because he's not a monster or a vehicle. Crazy. Absolutely insane amount of value from this thing if you are able to trigger it, and he forces so many Battleshock checks that he's probably going to be able to do it himself. Now, from there, we're taking 2 units of 6 Nurglings. We can regenerate the Nurglings back with Fetid Resurgence. It is 2 CP, so unless Epidemius is pumping off, we're probably not doing that too often, but it lets you get a lot of value back because you can get D3 Nurglings back. They can also regenerate from the your Battleshock step checks as well. The 2 units of Plague Bearers that have essentially the same effect. They're also objective secured. They're good at just holding things down. 3 units of Beasts of Nurgle, 2 units of 2. Very rare we see units of 2 Beasts of Nurgle, but they're very difficult to kill. They're T10 when they're near a Great Unclean One. They also regenerate all their wounds once you don't kill them. So if you commit into these big units with a bunch of wounds and don't destroy them, the second Beast of Nurgle can hold down the fort. So they're very good at holding early game primary because it's hard to kill 2 units of them, especially once you're dealing with having to be within 18 inches to shoot them. So you can't shoot them with all your long range guns. We have another individual Beast of Nurgle, 1 Fleshhound unit just for up down for free because they can go into reserve, then +2 War Dog Stalkers. Now, unfortunately, we don't have things like Soul Grinders, which we oftentimes see in this detachment just in order to buff their shooting with Font of Spores. The Font of Spores is going to be improving our damage in melee. We can reduce enemy toughness by 2 thanks to the Great Unclean Ones, give +1 damage thanks to Rodigus, and then the +1 AP from Font of Spores. That -1 toughness, however, benefits everyone, and you can do it 12 inches away from the Great Unclean Ones. So you can, for example, deep strike them in and then point the buff at an enemy unit, which means that the War Dog Stalkers get the bonus on both their melee and their ranged attack. So it works kind of like Death Guard, where, well, they don't get things like the Nurgle Demon specific buffs. They will be buffed by the Great Unclean Ones, just kind of passively using their ability, which is going to be helpful and give the unit, the army, a little bit more additional shooting. So, pretty wild, super duper cool list. A little non-standard for what we see from typical Plague Legion, but still incredibly cool. Now, from there, we're going to move over to the East Midlands Slam to talk about a Khorne Berserker Horde. This is a World Eaters list run by Daniel Greaves, who took it down with a Berserker Warband. Now, a lot of times we see Berserker Warbands that are kind of focused on like a combination of guns and melee and take a little bit of units like 8-bound to act as kind of small, independent, compact units that can do a lot of damage. However, today, Daniel did not do that. Instead, he took 50 Khorne Berserkers. So this army was taking Angron. He's back. The big man himself has won a GT 5-0. Insane. Absolutely crazy. He did get massively nerfed with the release of his codex. His recursion ability got nerfed. His damage output got nerfed. He still gains bonuses from the Berserker Warband effect, but he has less synergy with things like the detachment and the army ability. So he's hard to get value out of. However, in a situation where you're trying to pull focus from 50 Khorne Berserkers running down your opponent's throat, having this big, imposing, fast threat who can either absorb all your opponent's focus for a turn, otherwise he's going to just continuously kill their units, or he can wait until all of your Berserkers have engaged, and then he can late game for you. After the Berserkers engage or kill whatever's going to threaten him, he can just sort of fight by himself. Either one of those is relatively effective. In addition, the Khorne Berserkers with their icon can give you additional Blessings of Khorne dice. So if you have a lot of Berserkers dealing a lot of damage, you can potentially give yourself additional chances to roll the 666s to bring Angron back. So there is a little bit of synergy there as well. So we're running Angron, we're running Karn the Betrayer to attach into a unit of 10 Khorne Berserkers inside a Chaos Rhino to deliver him, plus 2 Juggernaut Lords. One has a favorite of Khorne, so you can reroll your dice when you're doing your Blessings of Khorne, one with Berserker Glaive to improve his melee attacks. Those guys are both going to attach into units of 20 Khorne Berserkers, and they give their unit movement 10. So +2 move that allows the mounted character himself to go through walls, which is effective. Plus, the unit can advance and charge. So you can give them, they can threaten up to potentially 16 inches, not including any weird Blood Surge movements that they might end up being able to do before they charge, which is incredibly powerful. Now, from there, we also have 3 units of 2 Chaos Spawn for utility, plus a Jackal unit to hold down the backline. So everything else is very straightforward. The army is just wildly aggressive. It's 50 Khorne Berserkers. One of them's in a Rhino. 2 of them move super duper fast. They have 1,000,000 trillion melee attacks. They get huge bonuses when you favorite of Khorne to reroll into things like lethal or sustained hits, because the units have so many attacks. And then that is covering for, or being covered for by, an enormous, powerful Demon Primarch. So Angron has returned to the field of playability, I guess, at least for this one event. Absolutely crazy. Now, quickly as well, we also saw some success from the newly nerfed Imperial Knights coming from the Bendigo Open. Now, I'm going to breeze over this list relatively quickly because it is going to be outdated. We have talked about already the new Imperial Knight Codex has been spoiled. It has changed fundamentally a lot of the detachment and army synergy. So this is going to be kind of outdated, but Michael Hamilton did take down the event 5-0 using the new points value, so the newly up-costed Imperial Knights, including Canis Rex, a Cerastus Knight Atropos, and a Knight Warden with Mythic Hero, so he can apply his -1 damage buff to 2 separate Armigers. We're then running 2 Armiger Helverins, 3 Armiger Warglaves, and holding the back objective with a Ministorum Priest. We also have, it's important to note, Mysterious Guardian on the Atropos, so he can up, down, and jump himself around the table. Pretty relatively standard stuff. I do like to see some interesting Warden play. I think the Knight Warden's probably, at least at the time of recording in the Index, kind of underplayed. However, he's about to turn into the Knight Defender, who is probably going to see a lot of play, so who has the same bondsman ability that the Warden does now, which is one of the best bondsman abilities in the game, plus he gets a bunch of really good guns, so we're certainly going to see that guy. Now, with that, we'll move over to a lesser-played faction, Genestealer Cult, for, again, another lesser-played detachment. This week is one of the coolest weeks of 40k we've ever seen. This is Tay from Battle in the Bush, running Xenocreed Congregation. Now, this detachment is very seldom seen, but it gives you reroll advance and charge rolls on your Acolyte, Neophyte, and Metamorph hybrids while characters are leading the unit. In addition, you also gain 3+ Feel No Pain on things like Magus Premises or Acolyte Icon Wards when they are leading such units. This entire detachment is focused on getting bonuses from these characters and buffing things like your Acolyte hybrids. Acolyte hybrids are also already a pretty good kind of mid-range objective skirmisher, and things like your hybrid metamorphs are very good sort of melee counterpunch units, and this detachment simply makes them better at that job. So we are bringing, first of all, an Acolyte Icon Ward with deeds that speak to the masses. This gives you 2 additional resurgence points, so it's essentially 25 points for what is effectively an additional unit of 5 models that's going to come out of reserve after you lose a model. So already, you're just getting value. It's largely pure value. We have a second Icon Ward with Denunciator of Tyrants that gives you +1 to hit and wound against character units. Already, pretty good if you are expecting to see things like, big Imperial Knights, Chaos Knights on the battlefield, or big bricks with attached characters inside them. +1 to hit and wound against them is crazy. It works on all your attacks, so it also works on your ranged attacks too, and a lot of these units have things like Hand Flamers that they can get that bonus using as well. Now, the melee sort of core of the army is empowered by 3 Biophaguses, which give you lethal hits to your units. We also have a Sanctus, as well as a Reductus Saboteur for some early game play, plus a Primus with Incendiary Inspiration. That gives advance and charge to his unit, and he's also getting them hit rerolls. Now, we're running 4 units of 5 Hand Flamer Acolyte hybrids. These guys get rerolls targeting enemies on objectives, so they're good at taking objectives. We also have some big melee bricks for 3 units of hybrid metamorphs. We have some ranged units in the form of 3 Achilles Ridge Runners. These guys are equipped with heavy mortars, so they're going to apply their crossfire bonus from out of line of sight. 3 Goliath trucks to carry the metamorphs to the battlefield, plus some forward operation in the form of 2 Adel and Jackal squads, plus a Pure Strain Dreamstealer squad to clear out enemy screens. Now, the important thing here is that when you're pushing with these units, you can, if you lose something like your Primus, for example, who's very fast, he advances, charges, full hit rerolls, he does a bunch of damage. When he dies, or when any of your Primus or Acolyte hybrid characters die, you can target another character with Vengeance for the Martyr to give anything in your army full hit rerolls against that target. So this army can kind of play in stages. You can play very explosively out with like the Primus, for example, who already has that ability baked in, and the Acolyte Icon Wards, who has the one of them which has the +1 to hit and wound characters. So those characters by themselves are going to do a lot of damage, even if they're just in 5 sort of Acolyte hybrids. If those characters die, you can then give full hit rerolls to your Metamorph units, who also then have lethal hits if they're attached in with the Biophagus. We can also use Frenzy Devotion for +1 attacks and weapon skill, so we can full reroll, gain additional attack, which has lethal hits, and full reroll those attacks, just hitting on 2s to try to fish, to gain additional lethals. So even into really high toughness enemies, comboing all these effects together, and they happen at different stages, which is important, right? One of them is the leadership effect, which is passive. One of them happens early when you lose the character. The other one just happens when you attack with the unit. You could potentially stack those together for a ton of damage. And you can empower that with Tireless Fervor to give them advance and charge, and then they also get rerolls to advance and charge rolls thanks for the detachment ability as well. So this army has it attacks in waves of these really powerful melee units. When have abilities stacked on top of them in classic Genestealer cult fashion, they do incredible, insane damage. Absolutely crazy to see an army like this on the table, especially after we've seen months and months of pretty good results from things like a more standard variety of just regular sort of Host of Ascension. Now, last but certainly not least, let's talk about Grey Knights and their tie in the finals of the Smite Club Open, where Donovan Sayo went undefeated, X-0-1, 1 draw in the final game with a Banisher's detachment. Now, this is the interesting detachment where you are able to gain kind of a dark pact. You take a leadership test when your Grey Knight units are selected to fight in melee. You can either gain psychic, sustained hits, or lethal hits on your psychic attacks when you do so. Ideally, this gives you some relatively powerful melee bricks, and you do have things like Celerity for 1 command point advance and charge. You have Mist of Deimos, so you can, or Shadow of the Anarch is what it's called now, where you can sort of advance up, fight an enemy, they fall back from you, or they move up to attack you. You go back into reserve, and then rapid ingress back, and then you do it again. So there's a lot of interesting kind of melee play you can get out of this detachment. It doesn't have a lot of buffs for your ranged attacks, but it does have a lot of these sort of powerful maneuver effects, which are nice, plus the additional bonus damage in melee. Sometimes, unfortunately, it is kind of inconsistent, which is a little bit weird for Grey Knights to do. It's a classic psychic test energy where you cast a psychic power when you go to fight and you might fail it. Not having great control over what their damage output isn't the best situation ever. However, we are shoring that up a little bit, and I am going to preface this army by saying it is likely to change in a little bit here because it is running the current version Canis Rex. So he's at 415 points, which is the new points value for Canis Rex. However, Canis Rex in the new Knights Codex has gotten his damage output dramatically reduced. It's because he no longer has the Chainbreaker ability to do enhanced critical hits for additional sustains. So he does a lot less damage, so he's less effective as a singleton sort of anti-tank build in armies like these. I have said it many times in the past, though, that I do like Canis Rex being a strong inclusion in these Imperium lists, because the lists that already have good internal synergy don't usually take him because he's a big goober, right? A lot of times he dies. He's one of the squishiest knights because he's only a Questoris chassis. He doesn't have any defensive technology. However, he hits really hard. So he shores up the matchups for a lot of these lesser played Imperium factions. Things like Grey Knights, whose codex kind of released to a whimper and haven't really seen much play, largely because they don't really have strength characteristics above 10. Canis Rex does, however. So he can make Grey Knights do well in some conditions. And I think that's really cool. And a lot of times, basically all we've seen is that Canis Rex sees play in factions that otherwise struggle, whereas the factions like Space Marines or whatever that are already internally balanced and relatively strong by themselves don't need him. So he's actually, as an ally option, being a very powerful ally option, he's actually really good. And I almost advocate for him being cheaper as an Imperial agent, just because factions that are otherwise underpowered get buoyed up by him. Now, I'd rather see those factions get rebalanced, of course, but worst case scenario. I would rather see Grey Knights do well with Canis Rex than Grey Knights not do well at all, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So with that, Donovan is taking a Brotherhood Librarian with Pyre Soul. That's an enhancement that deals D3 mortal wounds to an enemy within 24 inches of the invisibility to the Psyker. So he kind of gets a little bit of his old Vortex ability back where he can just do damage to people, which is great. That's nice to see. We have a Castellan Crow who's going to be hopping into a big unit of Purifiers. Now the Purifiers in the new Codex they do a lot of damage. They're going to get those sustained in lethal or sustained or lethal hits. In melee, they also gain full wound rerolls when they target enemies on objectives, or they reroll wound rolls of 1 otherwise. So they're incredibly good, very effective infantry sweepers. They're also pretty solid in melee as well. And Castellan Crow just amps both those sides up because he himself is pretty good in melee, especially with wound rerolls, and then he also gives them additional ranged attacks. Now we have a Nemesis Grandmaster as well, just to act as another sort of anti-tank option. He's got his big Nemesis Demon Hammer with rerolls against monsters and vehicles, so he can do a ton of damage. Now with that, we're running a single strike squad plus 3 interceptor squads of 5 interceptors apiece. Now these guys are going to be using celerity to act as little sort of disruption pieces. They're sort of like assault jump pack intercessors, but all of them are equipped with 2 damage melee weapons. So they can advance and charge for 1 command point, jump onto an objective. Even if they don't clear the unit they're charging, they'll likely knock it down to the point that they auto-see them on the objective. So they're good sort of maneuver units because they can move, shoot, move again if they need to, but they're also good at just sort of disrupting your opponent on objective. We then have a big Paladin squad, potentially for the Brotherhood Librarian to hop into. Those guys are going to be just they're good both at clearing infantry because they're able to take a ton of incinerators. So they take, I think, 3 incinerators in the unit at a baseline, plus whatever the character's carrying. So he's doing mortal wounds, plus he's also shooting with his own psychic power. And then they have an Apothecary plus 3 damage melee attacks, so they're good into a variety of targets. We have a Purifier squad to attach with Castellan Crow, and then a bunch of utility brought specifically by Assassins. So we have Canis Rex plus the Nemesis Grandmaster, to a lesser extent the Purifiers is kind of your hammer blow pieces that are going to be kind of committing in the late game. With the Interceptors that can fight enemies on objectives, but then to actually score the objectives, we have a Calexis Assassin and a Calidus Assassin. So the Calexis Assassin can close deep strike near enemies and then potentially battle shock them to knock them off primary. The Calidus Assassin can up down to continuously either CP tax enemies or to score secondaries herself. So 2 very effective utility units backing up a couple of big powerful melee bricks, plus a lot of good sort of this like hybrid melee ranged utility that Grey Knights are known for. Really interesting build. Definitely expected to see basically nothing but Warpbane Task Force out of the new Codex. And I do think that there are some units like Purifiers, for example, that are just incredible in the new Warpbane Task Force or the updated data sheets in Warpbane Task Force because of just the massive number of rerolls they get. However, they're a little inflexible, and obviously people have played against that detachment quite a bit, so they know what's going on. These new detachments, especially with the reactive effects that Banishers can bring, do have a lot going on that I think catches people off guard, which does give them a little bit of an interesting out in a lot of matchups. It'll be interesting to see whether armies like this continue on if Canis Rex is less efficient than he is. Obviously, he's still good. He's lost about 17% of his damage or so. However, his damage output is already astronomical. What he's not going to do is like roll 4 attacks, 8 hits, and one-shot a Land Raider anymore, like randomly just spike your opponent out and kill them, which I think I appreciate. Having datasheet-wide sustained hits is already good. Datasheet-wide critical 5 sustained hits on his old datasheet is a lot. So I don't know whether or not he's still going to be as playable in Grey Knights. However, he's still going to be okay. And whether or not, we continue to see Grey Knights in the future, I'm hoping that with an updated Militarum field manual in a little bit, Grey Knights will look very good after an update. But with that, that's all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Let me know down in the comment section which one is your favorite and what you think of this insane metagame we're in right now. One of the coolest episodes of this series that I've done in a really long time because it's such a breath of fresh air in the stagnant metagame that we saw previously, and it's such a variety of cool factions. So thanks to Adept Roll for sponsoring this video, and thanks to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, whether that's over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to be classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.